Welcome to the very first episode of the Try, Fail, Learn podcast. My name is Joshua Nolette. This podcast is going to be about professionals and the lessons they've learned through their years in business and through leading teams and anything that they're involved in. It's just going to be gleaning the wisdom from these professionals. Today we have George Speake, the Executive Vice President of the Orlando Sanford International Airport. This was actually filmed well over a year ago, but the idea for this podcast has actually been in the works for even longer than that. So let's get into it.
George, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate you just taking time out of your day to do this.
No problem.
So George and I have actually worked around each other for a number of years because I worked for the airport for almost 5 years.
Yep.
So I knew George almost from the beginning of my employment. I met George, and so we've done a lot together, just here and there, hit and miss. And I've been able to be in meetings with him and see the way he leads. And so that's why we're doing this, because I know George from that, and I've seen his leadership, and this series is all about leadership and working hard and seeing the things that you can do by working hard, because I believe that's the only way to be promoted and to do well in America is by working hard, really anywhere.
Yep.
So George, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead and give us an introduction for what you do here at the airport, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. George Speake. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Orlando Sanford International Airport. Been here for about 14 years. This time I've worked here twice. So total time at the airport is almost 17 years. And I've loved every minute of it. It's a great airport. It's got a lot of things to offer the aviation community as well as the community in general.
For sure.
And as far as I'm concerned, it's the best airport in the country. So.
There you go. So I know that for me, when I was in high school and I started looking at employment at the airport, right, graduated and came here to work, I had no idea all of the different facets that an airport has in it and the different roles that people take on. So you can explain a little bit, what does the Executive Vice President of an airport do?
Sure. So I wish that was like set in stone and I could say, well, you do this, this, and this.
Right.
But
just to preface this, right before this, we had situations where George has been in and out of this office over and over again. So an airport is completely dynamic and always changing. You never know what you're going to get.
So we just had a fire alarm today, and we had a couple of domestic disturbances that involved the police department having to be called. So you really never do know. You never really do know what's going to happen at an airport. You hope that it's a nice, calm day. Passengers get on the planes. They depart and go home just like they want, but you have to be prepared for almost anything. Essentially, an airport is like a city without a permanent population, unless you call the employees the permanent population. But, they're not even here every day, same day.
Right.
And so, everything that a city has to provide, fire, police, maintenance, to streets and plumbing and electrical, all those things come along with an airport. And then it has to be at a high level. Because we're dealing with equipment that has to have precise things happen at specific times to ensure the safety and security of the traveling public. It's a big puzzle of different groups of people coming together to achieve the same thing, and everything has to. It's kind of like an orchestra,
right?
So
that's a good analogy.
But what does the Executive Vice President do? Well, for me directly at this airport, I have police, fire, security, operations, maintenance. Noise committee, and then there's other things that are kind of one-offs. The air show, aviation day, where we educate kids about aviation. So, but in reality, it's whatever comes along. Like today, I've been working on a lot of environmental stuff. Going through emails. I mean, it's amazing how much environmental stuff comes into play at an airport. Airports are basically, in my opinion, and I think most people in the industry will agree, the most regulated place in the country. There's so many of the government alphabet soups that touch an airport.
Right.
So.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So one thing I want to touch on. So you said it's a city, an airport is a city, and it's very dynamic. So I worked in operations for this, and I saw a bunch of different facets of what I did. So I worked for the company that managed the terminal, and then George works for the airport authority. So my company answered to George in the airport authority. So I saw a lot of different facets as far as the terminal goes. But can you explain a little bit as far as operations goes? Because all I did was I managed security lines, cleanliness of the airport, making sure passengers have a safe and enjoyable experience within the terminal, right? As soon as they get on the plane, they are the airline's tenant, right? They're with the airline, but we're dealing with them in the terminal. George deals with overseeing us and then everything else. Can you explain what that everything else is?
Sure. So, what you're describing, generally an airport has a landside ops and an airside operations.
Right.
So you were landside operations. Under a contract by us. And then I have another group of guys that take care of airside operations. And also intermingle some with the terminal side of things. We're responsible for the streets and the curb and dealing with things there. So you guys,
and oftentimes
OSI,
we give assistance to us as well.
Exactly. And it's a team. I mean, it takes all of us working together, but you guys kind of took care of the in-between, right? So we deal with them coming to the curb, they come through the terminal, they get on the plane, and we're making sure everything's safe out on the field. So there's so much that goes into an airport. There's perimeter security, there's making sure the runways are safe, there's making sure that the terminal is secure and compliance with TSA and what have you. On the airfield, it's FAA that's involved. If we got an international flight coming and going, then it's Customs and Border Patrol that are involved there. When I say we're regulated by almost every entity within the government, one day I was in my office and I got a phone call that there was an inspector out front at the desk who wanted to talk to me from the Food and Drug Administration. I'm like, well, what in the world could the Food and Drug Administration want with an airport?
Right.
Well, it turns out the potable water that goes on the airplanes is, of course, makes sense now that I know it, regulated by the FDA. Right. And so,
everybody has their hands in it.
Everyone has their hands in it, and it just, it takes all of that to make sure that things are good. The fire department has to comply with state and federal requirements to ensure that we're prepared to respond to an incident with an aircraft. Right. We interact with the municipal fire departments because they provide our medical support, and if we were to have a structural fire, they would respond to that. Our police department is well, I won't say they're self-sufficient. They're able to accomplish everything that needs to be done, barring, God forbid we have a hijacking or an active shooter or something like that. Then we rely upon our mutual aid to come in and back us up there. Maintenance department, 2,500 acre airport, got grass to mow. We have, I think it's probably 130 or so buildings that we maintain. Yep. So, and that generates a lot of revenue for the airport, all those outside buildings. And
which I actually grew up in one of the outside buildings. So my family moved to the Sanford area in 1999. Mm-hmm. And then about 5 years later, we came to live at the airport, and my parents lived there every day and every year until last month. Yeah. So we were there 18 years at the airport.
Long time tenant.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's important for this airport. Each airport is different, but for this airport, we're able to keep our costs down to the airlines by having those outside or non-aviation revenue streams is what we call them. So the Commerce Park, the residential houses, we even have grazing leases. So, we've got property that we have cattle on so that we don't have to mow it. It's not that there's a big income stream there, but we don't have to mow it. So that's a savings. But over half of this airport's revenue each year is from non-aeronautical revenue. And so then, therefore, we're able to go to the airlines and keep those costs down. And the benefit is for our community, because we have lower costs, we can attract airlines like Allegiant, who then serve, 75 destinations all over the country.
All over the country.
And then, of course, right now with COVID, things aren't where we would like to see them, but we are also able to attract international traffic, which is a big boost to the economy. We've got all these people coming into the parks and, to see the nature here in Florida, and they spend money while they're here, and that helps our economy. So.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. For sure. And we'll touch on COVID a little bit later.
Sure.
First, George, I want to talk about, so the airport is extremely dynamic. And sometimes when things were frustrating, I used to say to myself, I don't know why in the world anybody gets into this business. Yep. And the reason why I would say this is because there's that saying that you have to be a jack of all trades and master of none.
Sure.
But when you work in an airport, you have to be a master of all trades, right? And you can't really be semi-decent at one.
Well, if anyone ever tells you in our career field, airport management, that they're a master of all trades, I would run far away from them, because no one's a master. But you kind of gotta be able to move on the fly. You never know what's coming, and so I come into work and I think this is what I'm going to be doing that day, and then things change. The day dictates what has to happen. Right. But there is a lot that happens at an airport. Right. So I would never say I'm an electrician. I would never say I'm a carpenter. I've dabbled in plumbing, but just enough to be dangerous. But all those things happen in our maintenance department. Right. And so having a basic understanding of what those guys are doing is important. Now, I could never go down there and say, hey, you need to put that wire here and you need to do this. Right. And I never would try. But I can sit down in a meeting and have a conversation with them and follow the conversation. Right. And I ask a lot of questions. Right. Most, if you talk to the engineers that have been involved with this airport or or other people who've been here a long time, I ask questions a lot because you never stop learning.
Right.
And that way, if I'm asking a question about pavement, then sometimes people think I'm trying to get into what their job is or tell them how to do it, but it's not that. It's just my understanding, so that 3 years down the road, when that person who can give me the answer isn't there, then I can help provide some direction.
Right, exactly. Which is something I really want to emphasize in this series is the concept that we're not going to know all the answers, right? And I'm speaking from a very low level. I haven't led a lot of people in my day, but something that became abundantly clear when I did get promoted to a leadership position here at the airport was that I will never, well, not never, but I will almost never have the perfect idea every single time.
Sure.
And oftentimes the greatest ideas come from those around you, like collaborating with you and coming up with the greatest idea. And so something you touched on is you need to know enough to have a working knowledge, but you need to rely on the people that are around you or beneath you that you're leading to get that job done, right? And then Steve Jobs is often compared to an orchestra leader, right? He's not a computer engineer. He just put the right people in the right place to get the best job done. But something I want to talk about is why in the world you got into this industry. I love the airport industry. I think it's great. I think the dynamic nature of airports brings in such a potential for business, not just in aviation, but as you're saying, other properties that are non-aeronautical revenue is what you called it, but also things like restaurants, stores. I mean, the potential is massive. Transportation, parking, all those kinds of things. So how in the world did you get into this industry?
Well, so I've always had an interest in aviation, and most people that you find in aviation that are, well, I would say most people in aviation will say that. There's something that happened early on in life, and they'll say, well, I went out to the airport, or I got to fly on a plane, or I live near the airport, or whatever it was that drove someone's interest. So my grandfather on my mom's side was a pilot. He flew with the Navy. He didn't fly in combat. He had a stomach condition that prevented him from doing that. That ultimately we found out was cancer later down the road. And, and so, way later down the road, but still. But he took me up on my first airplane ride. He had tons of model airplanes. He restored some antique planes, had his own hot air balloon, his own glider. I mean, this was a man who really, really was into aviation. Yeah. And so, I had that interest in aviation. Well, I wear contacts, glasses then. And, the story that people still hear now, and it's erroneous, is, well, you wear glasses, you can't fly. Yeah. And so, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I mean, what 10-year-old kid doesn't want to be, right? That's all there is. You got to be a fighter pilot. And so I kept hearing, well, you can't fly, you got to wear glasses. And so my interest in aviation was just kind of, I like airplanes. I used to draw them, whatever, but that was it, right? And when I was flying places commercially, one of the things that fascinated me the most was what was happening outside the window on the ground. I really wanted to know why the lights were the colors they were. I want to know what these markings were. I want to know why that person's pulling up the plane and doing what they're doing. Yeah. But it wasn't an interest that I had someone saying, well, here's what it is and here's what you could do because you're interested in that. So, I graduated from high school, went off to college for computer mapping of all things, because I do have an interest in maps. Okay. and really wasn't interested in college. And so I wound up quitting and moved to Alaska. Well, let me back up. I skipped a step. After just kind of bumming around, because there's really no other way to describe it, for like 3 years, I joined the Air Force. Okay. Enlisted in the Air Force. Spent 4 years in the Air Force. Loved my time. And as luck would have it, the Air Force gives you, when I was in basic training, a sheet, and you pick the top 10 jobs that you want to do. I wanted to be a crew chief, working on planes. Right. There were 9 crew chief positions, and so I picked all of them. I got this 10th position that I've got to pick, right? Right. And it was something called Air Transportation Specialist. And I read the description. I'm like, whatever. But it's my 10th. I'm not going to worry about it. Right. So I wrote that down. Well, lo and behold, you got the 10th I got the 10th position. I got Air Transportation Specialist. And what basically, to sum that position up, is the Air Force has an airline within the Air Force. Okay. And so air transportation specialists are the ones that run that airline. Okay. We load the planes, unload the planes, cargo, load plan the cargo, clean them. Right. offload the baggage and process passengers. We actually had screening areas for, you had a magnetometer and an x-ray for the baggage and all that. So it really was like, an airline. And all I tried to do while I was in the Air Force was get out of the base I was in that was running this little airline kind of thing, right? And go to what was called a mobile aerial port, which is where you get to travel the world and go into places where people are shooting at you and all that kind of stuff. And it never worked out for me, thankfully.
Yeah.
Happy I did what I did. So I got out of the Air Force, and that was my dabble in plumbing. I worked for Roto-Rooter for about 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Quickly realized that I wanted to get back to aviation. And long story short, wound up taking a job on a contract in Alaska on a place called Shemya, out in the middle of out the end of the Aleutian Islands. Basically did the same thing I had done in the Air Force, but I was as a contractor. So making better money and entered the private world,
Right.
And so wound up hearing about another contract on another island in the Aleutians called ADAC Naval Air Station. And the Naval Air Station was closing, transitioning from a base to a city.
Okay.
And so I called them up and told them I was interested in a job there and I wanted to work the line, basically parking planes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the person that I was talking to on the other end of this phone said, well, I'm not looking for that. He said, those positions are filled. He said, we're hiring an airport manager. And I said, well, I'm not an airport manager. And he didn't hang the phone up.
Okay.
And I said, well, and he said, well, we're hiring an airport manager. And I said, we went back 2 or 3 times about, I'm hiring an airport manager. And I said, well, that's not what I am. And then I changed my answer. And I said, well, are you telling me that if I tell you that I'll take the position, you'll hire me? And he said, yes. And as it turned out, they needed a warm body. The contract was just starting. They had weeks to go until they were going to be able to tell the Navy, yes, we've got every position filled. So I had all of a sudden gotten myself into a job that I didn't know anything about.
Right.
I had an inkling, but
sure.
Which
is a big role. Airport manager is a huge role.
It was a big role. And so I had about a 1 week turnover with a Navy captain. I'm sorry, he wouldn't have been a captain. He was an 03. I'm not up on my Navy ranks, but he really didn't want to talk to me because he was upset the base was closing. So I really didn't even have much turnover. So what I did was I wound up calling the FAA in Anchorage and said, okay, here's the deal. I've got this job out here, and we're going to be turning this airfield over to a civilian field. What do I need to do?
Right.
And the person I was talking to was an airport inspector, and he started sending me out things called advisory circulars. So there is a document that guides airports called Part 139,
right.
And then there's all these advisory circulars that are kind of supplementals to the guiding document.
Okay.
And I just started reading. So every night I would go back to my house there on the island and I would read. I would read about airport design. I'd read about airport lighting. I'd read about snow removal because we had snow removal up there. And started educating myself on kind of what I should be doing. The FAA would come out and do inspections because, again, we were transitioning this field. I also had the Navy regulations that I could look at. And I started figuring this thing out. And as time went on, my boss got promoted. He was over logistics and supply, environmental, the fuel farm, some other things. And when he got promoted, I moved into his position, taking over logistics, logistics and environmental. And then ultimately he got promoted again, and I got promoted to site manager of my company's contract on the island, and had 144 employees. I had added fueling, the fuel farm, 20 million gallon fuel farm, the harbor, so dealing with ships and stuff coming in, roads and grounds, so keeping all the roads and grounds clear, snow removal, vehicle maintenance on the island. It was a lot of things, and it was like this huge eye-opening experience. I was young. I was 26 when I went to Shemya, 27 when I went to ADAC. I left when I was 30. But it taught me so much.
I bet.
And, I couldn't possibly be doing what I'm doing now. And that's why I went into so much detail on what happened there without having had that time in ADAC. One of the things that I do, and I would hope other people do this as well, is you look back on your career, and I wish I could go back to then, because I know so much more now, and I know I could have done so many things that much better
in that role.
In that role,
right?
But it taught me a lot for now. So when I got to the contract was winding down, and so there was going to be no job there, And so I started talking to the FAA in Anchorage. I said, I kind of like doing this airport thing, this airport management. So, if I'm interested in continuing to do that, what should I do? And they said, well, have you finished college? Oh, no. Yeah. That little
Just
thing.
always the question in aviation when you get up to the
So
higher levels.
I had a year in college, out of high school. And I said, no, I haven't. And they said, well, you should. And they said, you also need to join a group called the American Association of Airport Executives, which I did. That was easy. It was like $200. That was the easy one.
Sure.
And then they said, get your real estate license. Haven't got my real estate license yet.
They say get your real estate.
Yes, because you deal with so many properties. So I've never gotten the real estate license. And I've learned, a lot of that stuff trial by fire as well. And still have this idea in the back of my head that maybe one day I'll get my real estate license.
Right.
But, I said to them, okay, well, college, where should I go? Mm-hmm. And they said, well, there's 2 places. And they said 2 places, and I took them at their word. I never did any other investigation.
Right.
And they said, well, there's this place called University of North Dakota in Minot, North Dakota. Or there's Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. I was married at this point.
Or the beach.
Yeah, I was married at this point. And, my wife, whose dad happened to live in Florida, said, we're going to Daytona Beach. And I really didn't argue much because Minot, North Dakota didn't sound appealing after 3 years in Alaska. And Minot is worse than Alaska.
Is it really?
Yeah, the joke in the Air Force actually was, why not Minot? It was a horrible station. So we came here to Daytona Beach at Embry-Riddle. And, I enrolled in school and I started looking for a job.
Right.
And the airport here, there was a company called Dynair at the time, which was doing the ground handling and what have you. Mm-hmm. And knowing that they would provide me with a flexible schedule, I started working there. So I went from, 144 employees to throwing bags. It was good with me.
Yeah.
I got to throw bags, got to park planes, no stress, load cargo and haul cargo coming off planes. And it was great. Then after I'd been here about 4 months, ran into somebody on the ramp who told me about operations, airside operations, and they were hiring. So I applied and I worked both jobs for a couple of months and both part-time and then went to just full-time in the operations position, which was good. I was able to work nights, which meant I worked here from 11 to 6.
Right.
And then I would leave here and if I had time, I would go home, take a shower, and then go to class. I did all my classes in the morning to get them out of the way. And if I didn't have time, then I just went straight to class. And then I would sleep in the afternoon and then do classes. When I enrolled in school, it was 2000, January of 2000. So the job market was fantastic for aviation. Yeah. There was page after page after page on the American Association of Airport Executives website.
Nothing but prospects.
Nothing but prospects. 9/11 occurs.
Right.
2001. And the jobs just shrunk to nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
And they stayed that way for a long time. I graduated in the spring of 03, and I go to the AAE website, and there's like 3 jobs posted. Wow. And that was like, oof, okay. Well, thankfully, I had a job because I was still working here in operations. So, there was a bit of pressure on me, but not as much as maybe there had been on someone else.
Sure.
And again, long story short, wound up talking to my dad who lived in North Carolina, and he told me about a position at an airport called Dare County Regional Airport, which was a general aviation airport in the Outer Banks, 6 miles away from the Wright Brothers Memorial.
Wow.
December 17th, 2003 was the 100th anniversary of flight. I had told my dad that I was going to be coming up to visit him for the 100th anniversary of flight.
Right.
And as it turned out, in reality, I was there because I was working at the airport that was kind of ground zero for everything because we were 6 miles away from the Wright Brothers Memorial.
Right.
So that was a fantastic, I guess you could say I had the capstone in the middle of my career because we had all the warbirds for the 100th anniversary of flight.
Wow.
We had people like Buzz Aldrin and Chuck Yeager and the FAA administrator and all, just all these kind of famous people coming through the airport. And I got to meet all these people, Paul Tibbets and, all the, not all, but a lot of the World War II big names were there because thankfully, a lot of those folks were still alive at that point. Tuskegee Airmen were there. It was just a fantastic event. And it was the 100th anniversary of flight.
Right.
And, that was great. I was there for 2 years. And I really had a desire to get back to commercial aviation. And so I started job hunting and found a little airport out in Garden City, Kansas. That was a commercial service airport. Had what's called a contract tower. So not an FAA tower, but we paid the tower folks to be there. And it had something called Essential Air Service, So it was subsidized air service through the FAA. And that was a great experience. They were below 10,000 passengers, which is a big deal for money. If you're below 10,000 passengers, you get $150,000 in grant money every year. If you're over 10,000 passengers, you get $1 million in grant money. And so my task when I was there was to get them back over 10,000, and which I was able to do.
Interesting. Okay.
It used to be when you would go to the employment data from the FAA every year, you could go straight to the bottom. And for commercial service airports, for what was called primary airports, there was Garden City.
On the very
bottom.
bottom.
So all you had to do is just go to the bottom. There they were. I'm happy to say that the young lady that took over my role when I left was working there when I got there. She has carried on with that airport, and now you can't go to the bottom. You got to go quite a ways up.
Wow.
They're around, pre-COVID, I think they were around 28,000 to 30,000 passengers a year.
Wow.
So
that's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I had intended to stay at that airport for about 5 years. As it was, about 2 years into my time there, the president of the Orlando Sanford International Airport, who I kept in touch with to the extent that let him know where I was and what I was doing as I progressed in my career, that I wanted to come back here. I made sure he knew that. And he called me up when there was an opening in management and said, "Hey, are you interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. When do you want me there?"
Right.
And so that was in 2006, and I came back January 2nd of 2007, and I've been here for 14 years. I came back as the vice president of operations and maintenance, and then when that person, Larry Dale, retired, Diane Cruz, who was a vice president here at the time, was promoted to president, and she promoted me to executive vice president and COO, and that's where I am.
Right,
so,
and that's where you are today.
And so, I didn't necessarily set about to choose this career field. I would almost say it kind of chose me.
Right.
The way things kind of played out, it all worked, and I'm incredibly happy. I love coming to work every day. So
yeah. I think that's pretty common with my grandfather tells a story. So my grandfather was a captain in the Navy, and he tells stories about when he was a little boy, he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a pilot in the Navy, and that's what he knew he wanted to do, and he achieved it.
That's great.
And he flew in Vietnam and had an amazing career in the Navy. And some people have that, that direction, like, I know what I want to do. And when I was younger, I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist. And then I got older and realized that I'm not a huge fan of school. And you have to be in school for a very, very long time to be a physical therapist. Yeah. So I realized that was not my path. But I love people. And I love being around people and leading people. And in my interactions with you, I've noticed that that's pretty common with you as well, that you just enjoy being around people and leading people towards a common goal. My dad is the same way. My dad has had a great career in the pool industry, but it kind of chose him as well, just through time and through life. And he just enjoys being around people and moving towards a common goal. Yep. And so I want to ask you, because I've been in positions where, I got promoted and I fought for it. I wanted that promotion. And when I got there, I was met with kind of this realization of, I have no idea what I'm doing. You know what I mean? I don't know how to lead these people. I don't know how to motivate these people. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I want to ask you, when you moved into that airport manager role, you read on your own time, like off company time, you know what I mean, just to make yourself a better employee and how you would be able to lead in that role better. But when you were met with that, I don't know if you were even met with this kind of, I'm inadequate, or I don't know how I'm going to do it. But when you got met with situations like that, how did you overcome that? How did you deal with that?
So in all fairness, the reading that I was doing, it was off company time. But when you're on a remote island, 6 hours away from anything that resembles civilization, there's not a whole lot else to do. So,
true.
Not everybody would be, not everybody would be in that situation. I think for me, managing people is that they are people just like me. Right. So, everyone has their role in an organization. Everyone wants to feel that they're valued. I try. I'm not going to say I always succeed, but, I try to just talk to people like I expect to be talked to. Treat people the way that you would expect to be treated. You're always going to find people. You're always going to find employees that are a little more difficult than others. Sure. Sometimes you can't have that motto, treat people like you want to be treated. Sometimes you have to be the boss. Right. I prefer not to be the boss. Right. But sometimes it takes that. I don't know. I don't know that it's something that I've learned. I know there's lots of books out there that talk about how to manage. I think I do a good job, but for the most part, I just do what feels right.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I think that's a big part of management and leadership is just, I think, keeping a level head. You know what I mean? Keeping it, you're not better than the people you're leading.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're just all moving towards a common goal, and I'm the guy getting you there so that we can do it. And that's
Exactly.
it. You just have another role.
I mean, for the most part, people go to work because they want to work.
Right.
You know, most people aren't going to work and saying, geez, I mean, you may not want to be there every day, but you know, you have a desire. And, you know, it's like I've always said, even if I were to win the lottery or whatever, I would still find something to do.
Right.
I couldn't sit around and do nothing.
No,
you know, you're going to find something to keep yourself occupied. For me, what I get to do is entertainment. It really is. I mean, I love my job.
Right.
So, you know, I enjoy it. And I hope and expect that other people, and I want to provide an environment where they can enjoy their jobs.
Right.
So I think if you do that, then it makes that working towards that common goal a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So, George, I just want to leave you with one question. I want you to give me the best advice you ever received in your whole career and the worst advice you ever received.
Sure. So not all of it comes from my career.
Okay.
I'm going to go to two on the worst advice. One was my first year in college, that first attempt at college. I met a guy, and he was rushing. I was kind of like considering it, but not really. And he said, you know, you got to make sure you're always dressed well. It doesn't matter how you feel. You know, comfort's not important. You just got to look good. And I thought, no way. I got to be comfortable. So be comfortable.
Okay.
Try to look good, but be comfortable, you
Sure.
know, but it's, you know, if you're uncomfortable, it's going to show. Right?
Yeah. Good point.
And then the second wasn't really necessarily a piece of advice, but I'll turn it into a piece of advice.
Okay.
I had someone when I was applying for that job at ADAC that wound up, you know, with the airport management. My boss at Shimmy at the time said to me, he said, "You're never going to succeed. You won't make it in that job." And I ignored him. And so I guess the advice is, don't ever let someone tell you can't do something.
Right.
The moment you start thinking you can't.
That is actually where the camera cut out, so we were not able to capture everything that George said. But I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the Try, Fail, Learn podcast. If you did, please leave us a rating wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. Until next time.